All right. Well, hello everyone, and welcome to our webinar today, Creating Online Assessments in myCourses. My name is Barbara Stetchison, and I'm here today with my colleague, Teddy Quintoro. We're both learning technology consultants with teaching and learning services. Also joining us today is Adam Finkelstein, who is the Associate Director of Learning Environments at TLS, and he will be moderating the chat during our session. There are just a few items I would like to bring to your attention before we begin. This session is being recorded, so if you prefer to not be visible, you can turn off your video so that you don't appear in the recording. Also, the recording, as well as any additional resources that we mentioned today, will be posted on the TLS website. Also, please note that you've been muted upon entry, and we ask that you remain muted for the duration of the webinar. Teddy and I will be answering your questions at the end of the session. We've set about 10 minutes aside for this. However, feel free to use the chat if any questions come up along the way. Just type your questions in the chat and Adam will be more than happy to address your questions there. So we have 3 session outcomes for you today. By the end of this session, our goal is that you'll be able to identify the capabilities of the quizzes and assignment tools in myCourses. You'll be able to distinguish which tool is most suitable for different types of assessments, as well as describe how assessments can be set up in myCourses to support academic integrity. So the quizzes tool is one of the main assessment tools in myCourses. In a nutshell, it basically is designed to make online testing possible. So imagine taking the exams, the tests, or the quizzes that you would normally administer in person and converting them to an online format. So in the slides that follow, we're going to look at what the quizzes tool has to offer, some of its most noteworthy capabilities, and what kind of assessment activities it best supports. So although its name may make you think otherwise, the quizzes tool is not just for quizzes or multiple choice exams, for instance. Although the quizzes tool does allow you to administer these types of assessments in an online format, you can also use the quizzes tool for other kinds of assessment activities. So we have a few that we would recommend it for. The first is that you can use quizzes to create practice activities. So these can be created to encourage your students to do pre-class readings so that they come to class prepared to engage in your session. You can also create practice activities in the form of a study tool, so providing students with multiple attempts to answer different sets of questions. And then once students have completed these practice activities, you can share the correct question responses with them so that students can use these for further practice or for further study purposes. Another great way to use the quizzes tool is to evaluate student learning progress through low-stakes knowledge checks. So this is an ideal way to promote review and check students' understanding of material, as well as give them an opportunity to gauge how well they're grasping different concepts by providing them with feedback on their understanding. An open book exam with a set time limit for completion is another great use for the quizzes tool. You can, for example, create an exam with a 3-hour time limit, which emphasizes more synthesis type questions that require students to apply their skills and knowledge. For instance, you can structure your exam questions around problem-based scenarios that require students to apply their knowledge to the given scenarios. You will want to inform students prior to the exam of which materials they can refer to, such as their notes or their textbook, for instance. And you can also include an honor code statement at the beginning of the exam to help reinforce academic integrity. So why use the quizzes tool? Well, one of the key components that sets quizzes apart from assignments is the other main assessment tool in myCourses that we'll be describing shortly. So the key component that sets it aside from assignments is that you can create timed assessments, such as an open book exam, as I just described. You may want to enforce, say, a 3-hour time limit to complete the open book exam, but allow a 48-hour window in which students can access it, so that there is a bit of flexibility in cases of different time zone restrictions, for instance. Students would then start the exam at a time that is convenient for them, And then once they've started, they would have 3 hours to complete it. Another reason to use the quizzes tool is that your questions can include more than just text. So you can embed videos, you can add audio files or images. So this can be useful for, say, a music class where students need to listen to a piece of music before answering a question or a series of questions. Quizzes can also be set up so that students have one or multiple attempts to answer the questions. So you can choose to set a set number of attempts or unlimited attempts. And you can also choose which of the attempts is entered in the gradebook. So whether it's the highest, the lowest, or an average of all the attempts. Questions can also be randomized in different ways to ensure that each student receives a unique set of questions. And then a really nice time saver is that you can link your scores directly to your gradebook so that you don't have to grade the same work twice. And finally, you can view statistics. So once your students have completed the quiz, it can be really useful to view statistics about their performance. So you can view such things as grade distribution, the grade average, specific question statistics as well, etc. So as you begin creating your quiz questions, you'll notice that there are several question types you can choose from to assess your students. In fact, there are 11 question types in total that can be divided into 2 different categories. So we have questions where students can select a response, such as the multiple choice question that you see here on your left. And also question types where students can generate a response, such as the long answer question that you see on your right. Also note that long answer questions are referred to as written response questions in myCourses. So other select response question types include true or false, multi-select, there's matching and ordering, and generate a question type. Other types of generate a question types include short answer, multi-short answer, fill in the blank, arithmetic, significant figures, and written response, as I mentioned. And all quiz questions can be graded manually, except for written response questions. These must be, all quiz questions can be graded automatically, except for written response questions, which must be graded manually. So there are 2 ways that you can create quiz questions. You could add new questions to your quiz directly, or you can add them to the question library and then import them into your quiz. So as a best practice, we highly recommend that you create all your questions using the question library, just because it offers a lot more flexibility. It's a central repository that stores and archives your questions, which you can then reuse within a course for different types of assessments. And you can also create multiple sections, which are basically folders, and then organize your questions by type or topic, just making it easier for you to find your questions later. Consolidating questions within the question library enables you to efficiently transfer your questions to new courses, so from one semester to another. And you can also import questions from an existing collection that you may have created previously offline, or from a test bank into the question library from a CSV file. Also note instructions on how to do this, as well as how to create questions within the question library, and any of the steps that we're referring to during this presentation will be posted as resources on the TLS website following today's webinar. In the quizzes tool, there are multiple ways that you can add restrictions to a quiz. Start and end dates can be used to make a quiz available to students for a specific period of time. So as you can see in this example, there is a 48-hour window open for students to access the quiz. Students must begin their quiz before the end time. But note that as long as students enter the quiz before the end time, they can fully complete and submit the quiz. So if they enter 3 minutes before the end time, they can still go through the entire quiz. However, if they are booted from the quiz for any reason, such as they lose power or their browser freezes, they won't be able to re-enter the quiz if the time period has expired. Also note that when the student submits their quiz, it is both date and time stamped. You can also enforce a time limit and identify a grace period. So in this example, there is a 90-minute time limit with a 15-minute grace period. A grace period is recommended, and it can be really helpful for students who may have a slow internet connection, for instance. And after the grace period has passed, all submission attempts will be marked as late. And you can also identify what the consequences are for submitting past the time limit. So you can decide whether a student can continue working on it, whether they can no longer make changes, or whether students can continue working, but the attempt will automatically be marked as 0 after the time limit has passed. Release conditions can also be added. And so these allow you to create a custom learning path through the materials in your course. So for example, you could require your students to visit, say, all of the content modules and topics in your course before actually gaining access to a final exam. And finally, special access. So there may be situations where you want to grant a special access to a quiz. This could include an alternate date, an extended time limit, or increasing the number of attempts a student is allowed. You can accommodate specific student needs by granting special access to certain individual students, allowing them time and date restrictions that are different from the rest of the class. So for example, this is really useful in instances where a student misses a quiz due to illness, or if a student requires more time to write the quiz. Randomizing questions in a quiz ensures that each student will receive a unique set of questions. So you can do this in a variety of different ways. You can do it by incorporating question pools or randomizing sections or your entire quiz. And this helps reduce instances of cheating. Shuffling can be done at the quiz level so that the entire quiz appears in a random order, or it can be done at specific just within specific sections of your quiz, so that only these sections have randomized questions. So when shuffled, every student gets the same set of questions, but the order of the questions presented will be different for each student. Quiz answers can also be shuffled to add additional variety to the quiz. However, this is specific to multiple choice questions. And also you can add a question pool to a quiz. So adding a question pool adds a subset of questions from a larger question pool. So this results in a different version of the quiz for each student. The greater the difference between the number of questions in the question pool and the number of questions on the quiz, the greater the chance that each student will get a different set. So this is especially handy in instances where you wish to create multiple versions of the same exam. We highly recommend that you preview your quiz before you make it available to your students. You can use the quiz preview option to view a quiz the way that students will see it before actually releasing it to them. So this is a really nice feature. In a preview, you can answer the questions, you can view allowed hints, and then you can even submit the quiz and view auto-graded answer as if you were a student. And this is really important so that you can test the accuracy of content and grading before it is released and available to your students. By default, once students submit their quiz, they're only able to see the score they received on their attempt. You can, however, share additional information with them, such as which questions they answered correctly or incorrectly, or both, as well as providing them with the correct answers. You can also control when students are given access to this feedback, so it could be following grades being released or after all students have completed the exam. If you're worried about exam questions being shared amongst students, then we recommend limiting the amount of time for which this information is made available to them and only opting to show questions answered incorrectly. This way you're able to control access to the exam questions after the exam period, yet students have access to the relevant information they need for their review. So this sums up our portion of the quizzes tool and what its capabilities include. Next, Teddy is going to review the assignments tool and what assessment types it can best support.
All right, thanks, Barbara. So the assignments tool is the other assignment tool, one of the two, that is core to myCourses. So what is the assignments tool? It's a really great way to collect student artifacts and track submissions. From a student's perspective, when they submit an assignment, they get a confirmation email that their submission was received, and they can always go back to the assignment tool in myCourses to show the history of all their submissions for each assignment. So from your perspective, it allows you to collect and have a bird's eye view of all submissions. So you can see those who have submitted here, those who haven't here, and those who have submitted late. Of course, it also avoids having to respond to emails confirming whether an assignment had been received or not. The assignment tool also allows for flexibility in terms of grading and providing feedback to students. It allows you to leave feedback, including text, audio, video. You can annotate the students' documents directly from the browser. This is a new feature from last year, and attach a rubric. We'll take a look at each of these examples shortly. When your feedback is published, students can easily access it from anywhere. And as an instructor, you can see whether it has been read. Okay, so what are the key considerations that you have to think about when you're building an assignment? Well, we can boil it down to 4 areas. We have the assignment type. There are 2 types. First, it is the individual, which is basically a single student submitting an artifact, or you have groups. When groups are created in myCourses, they can be assigned to an assignment where one group member can submit the work for the team, and the grades and feedback that you provide will automatically be assigned to all those students within that group. There's also submission type. There are 4 of them. The file submission is the traditional aspect that we think about, where an instructor expects 1 or multiple files to be uploaded. We also have text submission, and this gives the ability for students to just type in the answer directly within myCourses. They can do it from their phone or a computer, and for you to grade and give feedback directly without having to download or upload any files. And then we have 2 other ones, the on-paper submission and observed in person, which is effectively the same feature. It allows the instructor to grade and give feedback to an artifact that was not submitted in myCourses. So when we talk about timing for assignments, the key field here is a due date. And that is when students are expected to submit the assignment. But after that due date is passed, it's marked late. While the end date here is the timing when a student can no longer submit at all. So after that date is passed, they can't even publish or upload any files. And similar to quizzes, Barbara talked about earlier, the special access provides students beyond the regular timing that is set with the due start and end date, and if they need particular accommodations. So it works exactly the same way as in the quiz. So when you first set up the assignment, you also need to think about how you're going to evaluate the students. Will it be connected to the gradebook? Will you want to grade students without seeing their names, so blind grading? Will you want to annotate directly in the browser without downloading the file so that there's an annotations tool that I talked about earlier? Or will you develop and show students a rubric that will be used to assess their work? And that can be shown to the students before they even submit the work. So here we're going to take a look at, let's take a look at some of these examples. So we'll be going through 3 examples, term paper, team presentation, and an open book exam. Our goal here is to be able to showcase the assignment features in context. If you'd like to see more strategies for designing assessments, please take a look at the TLS website. And if you haven't attended or viewed the designing assessment for remote delivery webinar, I would encourage you to do so. The recording is there. All right, so without further ado, let's take a look at the first one. So this is the term paper with multiple submissions. You have a paper that is worth a significant portion of the final grade. And in order to break down the workload for the students, you are asking them to submit several components over the course of the semester. So all of these 4 actual items here, let me just highlight here, are variations of the myCourses assignment. So each of them are assignments. So to start this project, you have students submit early in the semester a working thesis statement. because you want to keep it simple, because you want to keep it simple for both yourself and your students, you're asking them to type in the statement directly in myCourses. As such, this is the student view. So there's no file submission. And you can grade it directly within myCourses and enter a completion grade with a short text comment if you wish at the bottom here. So in this case, this is a text type assignment, and it has a gradebook grade. Next, you are asking students to submit an annotated bibliography. So this is also an item to make sure they are progressing as they should. You might decide to give a grade for completion or provide feedback if students ask. So in this case, we have enabled the annotations tool to comment directly within the browser. So here you can add little comment text box and you can underline. And again, this is to do this directly in the browser. But if you're thinking about doing a lot more comments, we'll see that in the next step here. So for the draft, you're asking students to submit a Word document because this allows you to provide feedback via track changes. So you download all the documents, store them in OneDrive, and use your tablet to annotate offline, maybe in your backyard while sipping a glass of wine. Once you're back on your computer, you zip all the feedback files and upload it all at once. Because the files have a student ID and the assignment ID here at the bottom, they automatically get attached to the correct student. So you can have a whole bunch of files as long as they have those numbers. When you upload and add feedback files, it would go directly to each student. As another option, you might also consider using peer assessment. Here we have here for this draft to give students the opportunity to see each other's work and provide feedback and give them multiple perspectives back to the original student and not just yours. In this case, you can use a tool called Peer Grade that will automatically assign the peers for review. And finally, for the final submission of the paper, students will be uploading their document. Depending if you have previously provided through thorough feedback in the draft portion, you might not decide to download all the files, but read it directly in myCourses. You can do the annotations like we showed in the browser, but you also can complete a rubric, which will automatically provide a score as you click on each criteria or level that they've attained. And this rubric as well is attached and can be displayed to students even before they submit their work. So they have an idea of how they're going to be evaluated prior to submitting. So that's a quick and easy way for being consistent as well, going from one term paper to another. And this is what they would basically look like here. Okay, so next we're going to jump to another example. Let's now take a look at a team presentation. Let's say you have assigned students to groups of 3. You create the groups in myCourses, and for one of their final submissions, students will need to present. So in order to provide flexibility to students, you decide not to choose a specific tool for them, but you're allowing students to record a video using the tools of their choice, or even present live in Zoom, as long as they could meet the presentation requirements. So you could choose to create either a file submission, if students are uploading videos, or an observed in person group assignment. You could also create a rubric to make sure you are evaluating students again with the same criteria, regardless of their format. You can actually provide feedback via video, which wouldn't easily be captured or expressed in text format. Well, actually, no. You're actually going to record an audio file because you had to move to your basement as the kids were throwing a tantrum and making a mess upstairs. Oops, sorry. And as an added option, you can also gather feedback. So here, I'm going to show you with Microsoft Forms. So you can either have students evaluate each other within the teams, or you can have students or the groups evaluate each other. So the teams that are evaluating each other, like in terms of the groups. So that you can use the Microsoft Forms tool, and you can gather that feedback as the instructor and publish it to the groups as you deem useful. Another option as well, instead of doing this in the myCourses assignment, is to use the video assignments tool. And this tool allows students to give comments in line directly at the time of the video. It also allows video uploads that are larger than 1 GB. So this, to give you an idea of what 1 GB would be, it's about like 35 minutes of video in 1080p, which is a bit detailed, but just to give an idea of about how long you can upload that video. Okay, so for the final example, you're planning on delivering an open book exam. So you need a space to collect the academic integrity cover page the students have to read and sign. The students can take a picture of the form signed or digitally annotate the document and upload it in myCourses. So this is another example of an assignment being or an artifact without necessarily requiring a grade. You also have randomized questions in a quiz, but then you need students to write out their steps and attach a file, maybe specific to your area. So you can use another assignment to gather these submissions. To make it easier for students, you can also link the submission of the assignment directly from the myCourses quiz, and the original quiz here. And then once all of this is done, the students have completed, you can also grade the assignments portion blindly without seeing the students' names. So as you can see here, that's the anonymous user, and the anonymous user has submitted that file. So the key idea here, if I go back, is use many tools to match the different parts of the exam that will help students submit their work and also for you to give feedback. Another option that I'm not going to go in detail, but that maybe you might be thinking about is if your quiz requires a large portion of handwriting and it has many students, Crowdbark might be a better option than the assignment quiz option. So finally, there are a couple points that we'd like you to take away. So one is to select one or more assessment tools that will be able to measure the learning outcomes achieved by students, and also allow you to provide feedback, whether it's automatic with the quiz, providing a rubric. You also want to inform students in the course outline. That's a good practice. It gives them an overview of what is expected of them and the tools that will be used in the course. I think we've talked about this a few times, Adam and Barbara as well, is definitely provide an opportunity for students to practice the assessment methods in a low risk and a low stakes environment. It's perhaps graded, but it's not part of their final grade, so that students have the opportunity to see what it would feel like to use a tool before their graded assessment. So an example of that would be to create a course outline quiz at the beginning of the semester where you can ask a few key questions pertaining to the information on the course. Another example would be to create a pretest before the students actively learn the material. Pretests can help students identify the key areas they need to spend more time on before they actually read the material. Yet another example could be to recreate create reading quizzes. I think that's the knowledge checks as well that Barbara mentioned, to verify if students have completed the required readings before attending a live discussion in, let's say, breakout rooms. So for all these examples, try to use the tools you are planning to use for high stakes assessments. This could mean the material to be presented to students, like Barbara mentioned, if you're going to use images and videos, and also the types of answers that students will be providing. So allowing them to record videos, uploading different kind of file formats, taking photos of their work before the high stakes exam. So this will help students identify which areas they might need to get support for, whether it's about IT or if they might need a particular accommodation. Finally, we talked about this as well, is test the assessment you created by previewing it as a student, or you can partner with a colleague. So you can enroll a colleague as a demo student in your course and have them try the assessment and follow the instructions as if they were a student. So we've talked about a lot of information today, like the other webinars, and a good next step would be to take a look at a course called myCourses Essentials. This provides the step-by-step guide to what we talked about today, and you should have access to this course in myCourses already as an instructor. I would also like to remind you that this webinar is part of a series. You can register to the others on the TLS website. So we just covered this one, the creating online assessments in myCourses. And if you're interested, for example, in peer grade, that is also available later. And so many of our webinars have already been given. So you can also take a look at the website here. The recording of our current one will also be posted on this page. The link that you will see here, if you don't mind, Adam, if you can post that. We will also be able to stream the recordings, so from the links on the right-hand side, and download the slides. And a key area there is to click on the plus on the resources and readings, so you can read more about the different links that we already mentioned in this webinar, but any extra ones as well that comes from the questions that we'll be getting. So to cap it up, we'd like to ask you two questions. So one, what's your most important takeaway from today's session? And two, do you have any additional questions on what we covered today? So if you don't mind, type in your answer in the chat window and we'll begin to take a look at those questions. I'm sure there's already questions. I've seen the flow from Adam and it's great to see this coming in, but we'll try to see if there's anything else that we can cover live here.
Yeah, there was one I noticed a bit earlier about the annotations tool and how to enable that in assignments. So that's enabled by default. So when you're creating your assignment, at the very bottom of your properties page, there's a checkbox to enable the annotations tool. So it's automatically enabled. So basically you don't have to worry about it unless you don't want it for whatever reason, then you can uncheck it. Also, I think Jacqueline had a question about anonymously marking written response questions in the quizzes tool. Anonymous marking is not available within quizzes. This is a feature that's specific to the assignments tool. So Jacqueline, just to answer your question, no, it's not possible to anonymously mark within the quizzes interface for written response questions.
But you could still use the assignments tool, try to combine the two. I can understand that in terms of if it's a timed exam, that the assignments tool takes them away outside of that, but you can just inform them to stay in the quiz and they can still see the counter coming down. There's no problems with them exiting within the time that they have and then submit their answer in the assignments tool and come back and make sure that they submit the quiz afterwards so that it's still timed and they can still answer within that period.
Yeah, thanks for all your comments, everyone. It's really interesting to see your key takeaways. Yes, myCourses, the assessment tools definitely offer a variety of functions, that's for sure. And a lot just need to be explored further. And also, it's really important to keep in mind, as Teddy mentioned, it's not necessarily one assessment, this assessment equals X tool. It can always be a combination of the two tools together. And so it's really important to, be creative and not, be afraid to try using both the assignments and quizzes tool in combination for a specific assessment. In terms of other webinars for these tools, currently we will be having one on peer grade. As Teddy mentioned, I think the first one is scheduled for June 23rd.
That's right. That's it. Yeah. About the spending more time on combining multiple tools for an assessment. I think that's a great question. I think what we'll try to do is we'll address it in the resource portion of it, so we can actually show you an example of how we can embed the question from the quiz and go to the assignment. It's I wouldn't say it's complex, but it requires a few steps that we want to make sure that you can follow along than to show directly as an example in the webinar. So we can definitely address that in the resource.
Just looking through the questions. I see a lot of comments. I'm looking for some more questions.
Well, I can actually add another comment. If some of you are trying to do blind grading and also downloading all the assignments at once, it's a bit of a caveat there, because with blind grading, it removes the student ID from the file name. So I'd be a little cautious. You can't do the publish all the files at once back into the assignments. You do it one at a time, but it still provides the ability to blind grade and annotate documents. It's just that you would have to upload to the particular anonymous user, and there's an anonymous user number. That's if you're interested in doing that.
Oh, okay, there was a question about OSD and special access. So for this, basically you should just consult with OSD. And the mention that we had about special access, this is just a reminder that you do have the ability in myCourses to grant students that need special accommodations extra time using the special access feature in both the assignments and quizzes tools.
So there was a question about whether you can practice, an instructor can practice the online assignment and assessment all by yourself. Definitely with one computer. So when you preview a quiz, you can actually complete it like a student, and then you can actually get a grade. And that's one of the reasons why, I don't know if you've noticed, is that in the gradebook yourself, the instructors and TAs appear as a row, is because you can actually give yourself grades and see how it appears for students when you switch it to student view. So you don't have to necessarily create a different account. You could just do it directly with the account that you have and test it out for sure.
So Ross has a question about, hold on, it just jumped up quickly. My students having to draw and analyze schematics. And so an option for this would either be, perhaps you may want to consider using CrowdMark for this. And we'll post some links to CrowdMark resources, as well as we have already some on the TLS website that may be of interest to you. So the nice thing about CrowdMark is that students can upload either images of something they've drawn or written out for each of the questions. So this may be of interest to you, Ross. Or they can also, sorry, Ross, you can also use the assignment tool as well. So that's the other option. So it really depends on how your exam or quiz is structured. So both interesting options. In terms of being able to use a particular computer to be able to use CrowdMark, no, not at all. It's just regular computer. They would just answer. It's a quiz, as you would imagine a quiz would look. It's just instead of typing in the responses for each question, they would upload either a document or an image with their response. Any other questions? I think we've answered most of them. So if there's no more questions, then maybe we'll wrap it up. And thank you all so much for joining us today and for your wonderful questions and comments. We really appreciate it. We hope you found this session helpful. Remember that we're going to be posting a recording of the webinar, our slides, as well as a bunch of resources in the webinar section, as Teddy pointed out, on the TLS website.
Thanks so much, guys.
Thanks, everyone.